Wir warten noch ein paar Minuten.
Hallo.
Ich glaube nicht, dass die sie kaufen. Ja, weil du musst erstmal Fullscreen öffnen. Ja, das wird schon. Andrea, weißt du, warum wir nur so sehen können und nicht ganz?
Warum?
Ja, sie macht es von hier.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren, ich begrüße Sie recht herzlich. Ich begrüße Sie recht herzlich zu unserer Abendfolge. Auch fotoğrafın
You can hear me, right? Okay, super. And everybody in Zoom, hello, everybody here as well. I hope you can hear us as well. So my today's talk, thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you very much for having me in this lecture series. I think this is the first time, right? Yes, in 14 years, this is the first time. And this talk, the topic of my talk is today is a very, very new topic that I started to work on only a couple of months ago, that of indigenous medicine. My primary source for this study is the manuscript of Hripsime Topdjian, born in Aintab in 1883, which recorded in exile in Cordoba, Argentina during 1940s. I'd like to take this opportunity in presenting my work in progress to touch upon the idea of time and its relation to our work, because this is the lecture series this semester. It's about our work in progress. Last week, we had an enriching discussion on Benjaminian concept of time, more specifically on Jetztzeit and Benjamin's analysis of its revolutionary potential. In trying to describe when now was, we realized that it is not easy to define. For some, now was the moment in which we were talking. And for others, it began with their birth. Benjaminian Jetztzeit, with all its revolutionary possibilities and all possible futures, was instead a more multi-layered concept. We continued our discussion by approaching the concept of now within the context of our experience with the encounter and experience with the primary source. We can have perhaps a second slide. Okay, my first encounter with this primary source, the notebook of Hripsime Topdjian, was probably 12 years ago when its owner, Berlin-based Argentinian Armenian Silvina Dermagrdician, sent me some of its pages. They were beautifully written with some very interesting content, I was aware of the fact that the manuscript was about medical remedies to cure certain illnesses, some of which included quite strange combinations of ingredients. In those days, I recognized that it must be transliterated and published as a book in Turkish and Armeno-Turkish, but knew it would not be an easy task and couldn't be my priority to learn all the necessary qualifications to work with at that time. Therefore, I suggested Silvina contact an Armenian pharmacist, Ohannes Shashkal, the famous caricaturist based in Istanbul. As the time passed, I figured that I did what I could for the time being, and I was sure that the work was proceeding. Interestingly, I've never threw those sample pages away in the course of 2 moves from one flat to the other, and they remained among my piles of documents. As the time passed, I never heard that the book was published. In February this year, when doing my yearly paper cleaning sessions, these pages reappeared, and I wondered what happened with that very interesting manuscript. I learned from Silvina that Ohannes Shashkal did indeed transcribe some of the recipes, but the project had not been able to continue for several reasons. Silvina was very kind to send me the digitized version of the notebook, and I started to work with it. My enthusiasm grew because as I read it is in its entirety, I became completely amazed by the author. The time which passed since I first saw it has done some work on my pen, but also coincided, not only has done some work on my perception, but also coincided with the moment when I started to work on indigeneity. Last winter semester, I taught a course on indigeneity and peasantry in the Ottoman Empire, probably one of the first seminars ever to bring these 3 concepts into conjunction. The time to work on this manuscript had found me. Last week, in another Zoom presentation I held at UCLA Promise Armenian Institute, I had the chance to elaborate on the idea of indigeneity and the reasons for using this concept, something I would like to briefly touch upon here as well. Working with the concept of indigeneity, one has to take into consideration the knowledge of living on a certain land, and must know whatever is, certain land. This means indigenous peoples with their thousands of years of accumulated knowledge of living on a land must know whatever is under and on that soil. Consequently, considering Armenians to be one of the indigenous populations of their region, it is important to look at their relation to the land, climate, agriculture, natural resources, their handicrafts, their music, architecture and others. In this sense, the knowledge gathered together in this manuscript of indigenous medicine reflects centuries of gathered knowledge on regional plants, minerals, insects, and animals. The author of this manuscript, Hripsime Topdjian, is the maternal great-grandmother of Silvina Dermagrdician. You see her on my right, on the right side of the picture, with a white dress and seated. Yeah. Hripsime's husband, Nazaret Topdjian, was a merchant of Aintab who never returned from one of his business trips. The family assumed he fell victim to chetes, gangs, one of the many and widespread forms of provincial oppressions at that time. Hripsime would go on to lose many more of her own family members and in-laws during the genocide. In her exile, like many of the Armenians from the region of Cilicia, she too first stopped in Aleppo. As a widow, she had to work and earn a living, which she did as a teacher in Aleppo. In 1926, her Cartagan life of perpetual exile brought her to Cordoba in Argentina with her 2 sons. By 1932, she was already active in Cordoba, continuing the practice of indigenous medicine that she had learned back in Aintab. Her career of a healer is profiled in Hripsime of Aintab. She founded the Armenian Red Cross in Cordoba and the Center for Tuberculosis, which accommodated patients from all over Argentina. The manuscript starts with a dedication page in Armenian in which Hripsime dedicated the notebook to the Topdjian family. And I think we have a member of family, right? Yeah, super. And said it was written as a memory of her pure love to her children. It is dated 15th of March, 1943. Considering that she passed away a year later in 1944, perhaps this notebook was the most precious heritage she could leave her family as an inheritance. She must have wanted to preserve this knowledge and make it available to the younger generations, considering the exact measurements and application methods provided with each remedy. Hripsime must have had notes which she brought from Aintab and wanted to organize them more clearly and understandably in a single notebook before she died. Silvina Topdjian reports that Hripsime's sister-in-law, Nuritsa, also prepared healing remedies. So it is possible some of the remedies stemmed from her knowledge as well. This in turn means that the family in Aintab actively used plants, minerals, animals, and other natural materials for healing, which was likely a knowledge that had been passed down from their elders. Last semester, when we were thinking and discussing indigeneity and peasantry, we devoted one of our classes to carpet production in the Ottoman Empire. As I read the manuscript of Hripsime Topdjian almost simultaneously, it occurred to me that indigeneity, carpet production, peasantry, and indigenous medicine were all interconnected. Without knowing the soil, the minerals of the soil, the flora of a region, plants endemic to a region, how would somebody know how to dye a thread? How would they choose the plants or insects to derive the intended color? Thinking about these questions, I started asking my relatives and friends about their ancestors, whether they heard any similar stories from their own families about utilizing indigenous medicine. It turned out that there were several Armenian herbalists among the generation of my great-grandmothers. In my own maternal family from Erzurum, there were stories of missionaries, doctors who visited my family members there to see how they were healing certain inflammations, saving a leg, which was otherwise to be amputated. Shocked by hearing this, I continued my inquiries with other friends of mine about their own great-grandmothers and found that this practice of medicine was not a rare occurrence. One of my acquaintances from my parents' generation told me that her great-grandmother was an Armenian from Van, who, upon arriving in Istanbul, became extremely frustrated that she couldn't find the traditional plants and the herbs in the city. I started to think how, just a century later, not even having passed 4 generations in some cases, we are completely alienated from one of the essential types of knowledge, which binds a people to the land. Hence, the land is the vessel carrying the plants, minerals, insects, animals, as well as the people who know how to live with them and give life to others. Hripsime Topdjian's notebook, with its more than 340 remedies, is one of the rarest primary sources to reach us in its entirety, which should be considered as a miracle in itself. It has made its way from 19th century Aintab to Aleppo, from there to Cordoba, Argentina, and to us today in Munich. Like all other survivors who were lucky enough to continue their vocation, having practiced medicine her entire life, Hripsime knew that writing these remedies down was the only way to save them from oblivion. The indigenous knowledge of using herbs, minerals, insects, animals, and others might also be related to religious rituals, especially those from pagan Armenian history, which were later incorporated by the Armenian Church. An example of this is Sermortnen, the consecration of seeds. As I was wondering how and when Sermortnen was performed, one of my dear friends, Aras Kocayan, who is with us today in the Zoom from Beirut, helped me asking the priests of the Armenian Catholic State there. The priests reminded us that one's wealth was measured by their abundance of agricultural products, which was the result of fertile lands and good seeds. Therefore, Armenian peasants would ask a priest to consecrate the seeds, especially before they were to plant a new type of seed or at the beginning of planting season. Similarly, like other Eastern churches, the Armenian Church prepares and consecrates the Holy Muron, which is a mixture of pure olive oil and 47 aromas and flowers during the Feast of Holy Cross of Varak in September. It is prepared only by the Catholicos of the Armenian Apostolic Church, and the Muron blessing takes place every 7 years. During the ceremony, a bit of the previous batch of Muron is mixed into the new one in order to pass on its blessings and the faith to the next generation. The mixture is then sent to all Armenian Apostolic churches around the world to be used in their religious ceremonies and is also believed to be having healing power. Historic Armenia was well known for its rich flora, plant diversity, and mineral sources, which contained a potent ability for healing. The regions of Cilicia in the south and the Ararat plain to the northeast were both mentioned by a number of healers and travelers, including Herodotus. There were mines in the mountains of Rishtunik in Van and Sasun, which contained iron that was used to stop bleeding and give energy to the wounded. The Pontian king Mithridates VI, before Christ, 2nd century, who was known for Mithridates' antidotes against poison, utilized herbs collected from Armenia. The mixture named after him, Mithridaticon, a type of poison, was later developed in Rome, and yet it was already used by Armenians who placed it on their spears for battle. One of the most prominent Armenian doctors of the Middle Ages is definitely Amirdovlat Amasyatsi. He was born around 1420 in Amasya and attended the Sepastia schools of medicine, which were in Tokat, Marzivan, and Amasya. He was the doctor of Shehzade Prince Mehmet, who went on to become Mehmet the Conqueror. After the conquest of Constantinople, the Sultan asked Amirdovlat to come to Istanbul as the chief doctor of his palace and Cerrahbaşı. Amirdovlat's major work, Useless for the Ignorant, 1482, covers phytotherapy and pharmacology. Amirdovlat discussed not only the physical and healing characteristics of various plants and minerals, but also described their geographic distribution. He worked with several languages written in Turkish, Greek, Arabic, French, and Persian. He also translated many words from Arabic, Turkish, Greek, and Persian into Armenian. He died in 1495 or 96 in Bursa, where he spent his last years near its hot water sources, probably to heal himself. In the Middle Ages, medicine became part of monasterial education. Theological seminaries offered classes on history, mathematics, and medicine. For instance, the monastery of Gladzor in today's Armenia was known as the School of Doctors during 13th and 14th centuries. Graduates of the monastery were called Vartabets, healer, doctor, hekim. In Cilicia too, there were a number of monasteries which specialized in medicine. Arkagakhin, Karner, Keveriabad, Agner, Garmirvank, Mir Marash, and Skevra Monastery were all known for their medical schools. Almost all of these monasteries had a separate building for treating lepers and a hospital. As Hripsime Topdjian's hometown of Aintab is part of Cilicia, We should consider the medical schools and practices from this region to be relevant, as well as their interactions with other schools like that of Amasya in the north and Ani in the northeast. In Cilicia, there were around 100 of monasteries which dealt with healing and formulating remedies, both in Sis and at the center of Catholicosate in Rumkale. There were academies which played a significant role in development of local medicine in the area. Similarly, there were libraries and writing houses in the monastery of Skevra. One of the well-known hospitals in the region had been established by Queen Isabel right across from western gate of the fortress of Sis, later named as Cilician School of Medicine. This hospital and school were active until the end of the Cilician kingdom in 1375. And the building was devastated during the earthquake 1642. Nonetheless, the Armenians living in Aintab must have benefited from this historical knowledge, which was produced and practiced in Cilicia. Coming back to the manuscript of Hripsime Topdjian, she noted down 342 remedies over 130 pages in Armeno-Turkish, which is Turkish written in Armenian letters, bearing all the characteristics of Turkish dialect of Aintab. Hripsime had very nice and legible handwriting and a standardized way of writing, which indicates her level of literacy. Considering that she worked as a teacher in Aleppo, this should not come as a surprise. Only in the last 4 pages does the handwriting become irregular and rather difficult to read. So, what are the challenges facing us when working with Hripsime Topdjian's manuscript? The first challenge is to put the manuscript in relation to similar works, those of prior physicians or with her peers. However, as we don't have similar primary sources with which we can compare Hripsime's notebook, we are in a new terrain of research. Moreover, there is not substantial secondary literature on the topic either. One possibility would be to compare certain characteristics of Amirdovlat's work with that of Hripsime. However, it would require much more intensive work. For instance, the first 53 remedies of the manuscript are related to illnesses of eyes. Later in the manuscript, there are over 20 other remedies related to ophthalmology. Hence, around 75 remedies out of 340 are related to the eyes. Interestingly, in his second book of Benefits of Medicine, Amirdovlat also devoted 20 chapters of ophthalmology, discussing various conditions like conjunctivitis, blepharitis, keratitis, glaucoma, trachoma, cataract, and methods for curing them. Now, did Hripsime know Amirdovlat's work? Probably yes. Even if she didn't have the chance to read his books, the probability is quite high that at least she knew of Amirdovlat as a prominent physician and perhaps had some familiarity with the nature of his work. The second challenge is the ingredients used, some of which are specific to Aintab, in cases rather in cases rather obscure. For instance, for facilitating digestion, hazmetmek için tamı, she suggested combining citric acids and a certain kind of sugar, köpük şekeri. These should be crushed, mixed, and drunk with a bowl of water. Now, the challenge here is to understand what köpük şekeri may be. Similarly, for nasal congestion, she suggested to use darı filfili, which is listed among the list of plants in Amirdovlat Amasya, from Amasya's work as darı fulful. Today, it is also referred to as darı fulful, a type of long pepper which is not endemic to the region and yet used by Hripsime in several remedies. While it is said not to be grown in Turkey, one of the challenging questions is to determine whether they existed there at the end of the 19th and the beginning of 20th century. Another regional plant, Hripsime, is the root. Okay, Nazan. Another regional plant that Hripsime used in the root of is the root of sülüklü pancar. In Latin, Aurum maculatum, a multifunctional and yet very poisonous plant. It is still used in herbal medicine around Aintab and cooked in a special way, which makes it possible to eat. A third challenge are the units of measurements she utilized writing her remedies. It is of interest that after almost 30 years of living in Argentina, she wrote them in the language she knew the best, Turkish in the Armenian alphabet. Yet, more interesting is the fact that while she could easily have used the better known units of measurement, such as gram, she instead used Ottoman ones, such as dirhem, 5 paralık, 10 paralık, 5 paras worth, and so on. 5 paras worth, 10 paras worth. While dirhem may be easily converted to grams, how do we answer questions like how much kahke or crocus would cost 5 para at the beginning of the 20th century? The root of sülüklü pancar, aurum maculatum, can either be dried. So now this is a recipe. Best remedy against cough and expectorant. Yes. The root of sülüklü pancar, aurum maculatum, can be either dried or fresh. It could be cut and boiled. It should be cut and boiled. A bit of sugar candy, polat şekeri, this is again a version of sugar, which is used in Aintab, should be added into 2 cups of water. They should drink it 2 or 3 times a day. Doesn't matter whether cold or hot. Approved, iyi olur inşallah. And the original, öksürüğe, döş tutukluğuna birinci ilaç, sülüklü pancarın kökü, yaş kuru aynı, doğramalı, kaynatmalı, azık kadar polat şekeri katmalı, 2 tas suya. 2-3 gün içsin, soğuk sıcak zararı yok, tecrübelidir, iyi olur inşallah. Reading the titles of the remedies, one can get an idea of the most common illnesses of her time. 15 of the remedies are for curing baldness, 34 for sexually transmittable diseases, including syphilis, 25 of them are for hemorrhoids, 25 of them are variations of cough. And there is one remedy for a number of illnesses with very interesting ingredients that you'll see in the presentation. The mixture was introduced as an important remedy, a very important paste experimented for stomach, syphilis, lupus vulgaris with wounds. It heals all the wounds in the human body, aches, heartaches, migraines. Gayet tertibi mühim bir macun, tecrübe olunuk, mideye, frenk zahmetine, sırancaya ki daim akar işler. İnsanın vücudunda olan cümleleri sağaltan, sızıya, yele, yürek şişirir, yarım baş ağrısına yarar, çok ehemmiyetli macundur. So what do we have inside? 10 dirhem peygamber ağacı guaiacum officinale, 10 dirhem chutney, Smilax china, 10 dirhem sassafras albidum, 10 dirhem saparna sarsaparilla, 10 dirhem tarçın cinnamon, 3 dirhem sümbül hindi nardostakis, 3 dirhem cevizi beva nutmeg, 3 dirhem karanfil clove, 3 dirhem sarı mezdeki sakızı yellow mastic, 3 dirhem ravand, I don't know what this is, ravand, syrup or honey. All of these should be crushed and sifted and added to 3 dirhem of virgin honey, which is the first honey taken from a newly established bee colony. The patient should consume 3 dirhem every day in the morning and evening. They have to pay attention to their diet, making sure no chili peppers or sour things are consumed. Bunların hepsini dövüp elemeli, 300 dirhem erinmiş oğul balına katmalı, günde 3 dirhem yesin, Akşam sabah perhizini kaim tutsun, acı ekşi yemesin. There are a number of remedies for facilitating, yeah, this is how it looks like, yeah. Now, there are a number of remedies for facilitating the pregnancy in Hripsime's notebook. In one of them, she put together half a dirham of cinnamon, a quarter dirham of clove, and 1 coconut. These ingredients should be mixed and boiled in 100 dirham of wine, after which it should be drunk. It ends with, tez doğurur inşallah. Hopefully, she bears soon. In the later parts of the notebook, Hripsime wrote several remedies for infertile women, çocuğu olmayan karılara ilaç, which was followed by remedies for having 5th, 6th, 8th, and 9th pregnancy. We should also keep in mind that there were a number of remedies and quite painful methods for miscarriage as well. Talin Suciyan, with whom we have been working on Surpik Tekyan's letter to USA from Istanbul in the fall of 1922, told me of an Armenian woman from Philadelphia in 1947 who became pregnant at a rather old age, whose husband then died of a heart attack shortly after. As a poor widow and survivor living as Kahtagan, she felt it would be impossible to her to provide for her family without a husband while also raising the child alone. Thus, she appealed to the knowledge of the older Armenian women in the community who used their knowledge of herbal medicine to abort the fetus. Thus, Hripsime too must have known remedies to cause abortion, but she might have purposefully censored them, as there are none of them in the notebook. Gülhan Balsoy wrote in her book on the politics of reproduction in the 19th century Ottoman Empire that abortion was banned as early as 1838. Furthermore, Akşin Somel and Tuba Demirci's work emphasized that the Ottoman governors of Tanzimat exercised more control on women's body than ever. So it isn't surprising that women had devised their own methods for privately handling the issue. As can be seen from these examples, Hripsime had a wide range of knowledge in indigenous medicine. One of the biggest requirements for further study is to determine the Latin names of the materials referenced in order to create an index of plants, insects, animals, and minerals used in this notebook. The other would be to connect her work to her peers or to the work of prior physicians. While Hripsime's notebook is an invaluable source for us to understand the indigenous medical knowledge of Aintab, we should consider the fact that she probably wrote with what she preferred to write. Hence, we can assume that this was only a small excerpt of her knowledge of plants, insects, animals, and how to use them to rescue lives. In Giulia Calvi's study of the travels of 17th century Italian doctors to the Ottoman Empire and their observation of its medical system, she argues that folk, religious, and medical healers were competing for clients. Hence, another question would be, who were Hripsime's patients back in Aintab? Considering the rarity and even almost non-existence of primary and secondary literature on historic indigenous medicine in the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, Hripsime Topdjian's manuscript can be a very illuminating primary source that opens a new perspective to researchers and readers alike into the history of medicine in general, particularly for Ottoman and Armenian studies. Time continues to be the most important element of our lives. More often than not, we take things for granted and hardly realize the decisiveness of the moment. And after more than 10 years, my first encounter with the samples of this manuscript, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Silvina Dermagadichyan for giving me the opportunity to work with this medical manuscript of Hripsime Topdjian. Following Walter Benjamin, history writing should, after all, be something honoring the nameless. Thank you very much for your attention. We can stop sharing.
So we have some time for questions. I think could be in German or in English.
Yes.
The floor is open. I could raise the eyes with some very first questions.
Sure.
I'd like to know, do you think it was a notebook? I even would dare to ask you two questions. Do you think this was written as a private notebook, and do we have knowledge on these things, or was it probably a notebook to be published in one way or the other, orally or in writing? Does the text say anything?
Yes.
Probably in the introduction.
Yes.
And then my second question is.
Okay, so yes, this is a private gift to the family members. It is stated as such. And okay, and yes, this is a private gift, and now it's a matter for us as we can work on it, of course, as a primary source, as it is wanted to be worked on. I mean, the family wants that we are working on.
Rather, there might be an introduction. You didn't mention if there's an introduction to the notebook. And does the introduction say anything? Who should read it?
Exactly. This is the introduction. It's for the family. And there are 2 or 3 lines at the very beginning of the notebook. It is said that it is for the family members, and yeah, that's it.
And my second question would be: now I just came across the term. You said tested, well proven.
Yeah.
It's a well-known term, mujarrab, from Arabic literature on pharmacy, isn't it? So, do we know anything that it not in part has been copied from Arabic, Persian, Turkish sources? You said this is knowledge connected to the land, but it also could be that in part it has been copied from somewhere.
It of course can be everything, because we don't know how she compiled all these very exact measurements and things together, because I mean, she must have had some kind of notes. And when I say land, of course, the knowledge produced on that lands belong to that. So if she had this kind of connection with the written literature, of course, she might have copied it, but she worked as a healer, so she has her own experience. And this can be, of course, taken from somewhere, but this can be also, and I find it more probable to have proved that she proved it herself by healing people.
Or tested does not refer to a possible written source where it was written.
It doesn't have to.
But it could be or it could not.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. Yeah.
More questions from your side?
Yes.
Please, Alberto.
Okay.
And
I think it is more or less the spirit of the second question. I mean, there's thinking to what extent there could be some equivalent sources or some complementary sources from the same land, but maybe not necessarily from Armenian physicians, but for example, other sort of Ottoman physicians who were working with similar kind of ingredients to compare, the shared knowledge that goes beyond the particular.
Of course, it can be. And I also already mentioned that, the monasteries were working on medicine. So there is a knowledge produced in the monasteries, but of course, there is again something different, because this is a more perhaps a male line of producing knowledge, whereas here we have women who learned from their elderly other women. Again, it's a very gendered story, I guess. So probably at some point their knowledges from the monasteries and from the healers intersect at some point. I mean, we cannot think of completely separate worlds of healers being in Cilicia or being in the Ottoman Empire that they didn't know from each other. We should take for granted that there was this kind of a contact.
I'd like to add a question that has to do with myself. So you said that there was one kind of knowledge in the monasteries and another kind of knowledge with women. Now we do have nuns monasteries, right? So do you think that wise women had knowledge from nuns monasteries knowledge? Is there any information on this?
Not at this point. Not at this point. Not yet.
As we were talking now about monasteries, I would have a question related to
I think you
Topdjian.
might take off.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
to
Yeah.
let us, you know, what's-
And like, what was the connection between these monasteries and Topdjian? Like, was there any connection or like?
I mean, in Aintab, there were very many monasteries. And of course, and Hromgala is very near to Aintab, and it's the historic Catholicosate of Cilicia. I mean, okay, it wasn't 14th century, you can tell, but we should think that some kind of knowledge may be transmitted from one generation to the other. So we cannot say that there was no connection, but what kind of connections there are, we have to make our researches in order to find out. Yeah. So I have to tell, this presentation is now, I did it because I wanted to start the work, but then other things happened. And most of this research was done in Paris, in Claude Armen-Mutafian's library, one of the second biggest Armenian library in Armenian Ottoman, I don't know how to put this, library in Paris. So all this information on the monasteries, their medical schools, etc. This is a very specific knowledge that and it is very difficult to combine it with the recent centuries, 19th century, 20th century, and we have to work on that because there's a huge gap there.
We have more questions. Please,
well, it's a remark rather. I know that there is in this synagogue from Bing, who was a wise non-healer in the German Middle Ages, and maybe it has got some parallels to this case. I don't know, but
I think
similar.
I think there may be some kind of similarities because in Amirdovlat Amasyatsi's work, we see connection to Ayurvedic medicine, for instance. So if that connection exists, why not the others?
Is there two more questions? Please, first you and then.
When I was a child, after an accident, my parents took me to a healer, Armenian healer. I was end of 70s, and she told, and I was told she is from Sivas. Do you see a difference between healer from Ayalet, from Istanbul? It's a living tradition in Istanbul too, from Armenian.
No, that is a very good question. Thank you very much, and that is something I tried to emphasize. I mean, I did not grow up with any kind of indigenous medicine back in Istanbul. I mean, this was not practiced. But then the problem is that you lose connection to great-grandmother because grandmother is already cut from this tradition and great-grandmother is inexistent. And the land is not there. You're not on that very land so that you can hear from other people. So I first came across with the history of healers in the family now as I have this manuscript. And in Istanbul, these traditions died. This was the example I tried to give. The Armenian woman who came from Van was very frustrated in Istanbul because she couldn't find any of the plants that she wanted to find in order to prepare the medicine.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask the same. Like, when you talk to Armenians from the diaspora who like not in Istanbul but are just with very different pharma, if some of it survived or not, I think they already lit it up and so didn't. Do you know if the healers in the communities also go about other roles than just healing, if they have functions?
Whether healers were only healers or did that? Well, I think they were, I mean, it's just, you know, I suppose this is nothing that, you know, I read somewhere, but I imagine that they were healers and housewives and working on the land. I mean, peasants as well. So they had functional life, as all women always have.
Do you think the knowledge is still used in Armenia?
Not that I know of. We have the Sovietized modernization in Armenia, right? So these things are not really very welcome in that sense, because these are not like modern enough. They're not regarded as modern enough.
I only now understand that not only cooking and drinking is very much tied to a certain region. As you're emigrating, you're cut off from what you need to cook. So you're going to a Turkish or Greek shop and you try to buy it, but otherwise you're cut off from what you need. And the same is true for this kind of notebook. Now I wonder, as they went to Cordoba, what happened? And is there a kind of an afterlife? You said she
Yes.
was the founder of the Armenian Red Cross of
Yes.
Argentina.
Yes.
So what happened to this knowledge in Argentina? Was it just changed, transformed? Was it something to be kept at home and it was just a new life? So what happened to it?
So, Andreas, this kind of knowledge is always accompanied by a luggage, which is stored at a certain place in a house. And it remains there until someone opens that luggage and then reads the material inside. And this is not symbolic, this is real. And Silvina is now waiting for the right time to open that luggage again, to see whatever in this luggage can be found in order to give this kind of information to us. The same was with Paul when we were working on these letters from 1922 Istanbul. I thought we have 7 letters, and one day he sent me photographs of a luggage, very old luggage, and he started to send me 30 postcards. I'm like, but there were 7 letters. Now we have 30 postcards. I mean, where are they coming from? Well, they were in the luggage. So here as well, we have a luggage, and I'm waiting for the right time to Silvina to open the luggage and to see whatever we have. And she told me that there is a interview with her son. So this is a very important source, which we still have to have. I mean, it's gonna come. And then I understand from what I read, or from what I read on in the Hripsime of Aintab, that she continued practicing. So this center in Cordoba, that the tuberculosis center in Cordoba was a big institution which had patients from all over Argentina, and she was also the founder of Armenian Red Cross. This means that she was actively involved in the community life. This is much I can tell, I think, to that. Yes.
I just want to thank you. It's great. It's trans-regional approach and the trans-temporal approach, and that you can read Turkish in the meaning letters and whatever. I mean, it's such a rich research, and I wanted to express. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed the lecture.
Thank you very much.
It's not elaborated enough, not yet.
Not yet.
It's really interesting.
Thank you very much, Bettina.
Do you think that what you're searching at could be used as well in modern medicine?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, for me personally, I really want to try one of those medicines, when I have when I catch a cold, to see whether these remedies of cough, there are so many of them. And the bad thing is that there's no specification what kind of cough, and then you wouldn't know what remedy to use for what. And of course, these ingredients, they're not very easy to find and even to understand at this moment. But what I will do is that I will try some of them on myself. I mean, this is how the science works, right? should work.
It's the only way to do it, yes.
Yeah. And at least I think we have to make it accessible, this knowledge, and whoever wants to try it can try it, but can also regard it as a, as an indigenous knowledge as it is. That's also fine. But I found very interesting combinations of illnesses. So it makes, for our minds as well, some kind of sense. I mean, it has a logic behind it. We are not that. I mean, I'm definitely not a but person who works with, and I'm not a physician. I'm not working with botanics, etc. But it makes sense the way she categorized the illnesses.
You said that she worked as a teacher.
Yes, this was in Aleppo. From Aintab, she came to Aleppo after the genocide. This was a very common route to take from Cilicia to Aintab, and from there to Beirut, and some from there continued to Cyprus, and some to South America. So she continued to South America.
Do you have a family history? Did she get that information from her grandmother or from the village, or?
The only information at the moment that I have that one of the sister-in-law too was practicing medicine, Nuritza. But she was she had only her 2 sons when she came from Aintab to Aleppo and then to Cordoba.
So thank you again.
I thank you. Thank you very much. From Zoom, do we have any questions from Zoom? Probably if there were some questions, there might have been written, in the chat, but I don't see any of them. And I suppose there aren't. Okay.
So there are 2 announcements. The one announcement is that if you'd like to join in to have something to eat, maybe you know what is it?
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Maybe we go to the restaurant.
We go to the restaurant. Let's
Actually, again, you go to the Alpha-Simple if you'd like to join in. We have a couple of pages to see.
Yes.
And we meet next Tuesday with Dr. by Christoph Günther from Rhine University on jihadism in the internet. So she had